The Utah Jazz see an NBA defense, and then they wilt, and then...
Just like I did with my microphone and got it right. It's next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hi, how are you? I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA Insider. On today's show, we look back at the Jazz game last night against the Houston Rockets in preseason game number 2, where the Jazz see an NBA defense wilt, then adjust. Some good signs, some concerns. Starting lineups, pretty darn clunky. Will Hardy's talked about the 3 areas of noticeable defensive improvement he's looking for this year. Kyle Filipowski and Brice Sensabaugh shine for the Utah Jazz. We'll talk about all of that as we continue on today's edition of Locked on Jazz, which is your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps, on YouTube. Please subscribe, hit the follow button. I want to get over 50% of our YouTube viewers as subscribers. Do that. Hit the bell button as well. And to the everydayers, thank you so very much. Again, thanks to everybody who reached out. We're rolling. We're back at it. We don't need to do this every day. But I thank you very much. I got some really nice emails. I was talking to Ron about it last night. Actually, it was cool. Good to feel appreciated. Thank you. Good for all your understanding. So thank you. You're great. All right. So last night, the Jazz played the Rockets, who the 7th best defense in the NBA last year. Ime Udoka takes over and completely changes who the Rockets were defensively, which makes them like a really interesting kind of test case for the Jazz at some point in time. Can Will Hardy have this same impact? Because they added Dylan Brooks and they added Fred VanVleet, and they went from 29th in the league defensively to 9th. When they went from 22 wins to 41. This is certainly not what we're going to do this year. But at some point along the way, they were the 7th best team defensively after a miss, and the 4th best team in transition. They really play defensively tough, and then they have the personnel to do it, with Fred VanVleet kind of being a bulldog in the front. And then you've got top picks. You've got Jabari Smith, who was a 3rd pick, and Jalen Green, who's a 2nd pick, and Alfred Sengun, who's 6'11". And last night they were playing Amon Thompson, who's a 6'7", number 4 pick of a draft. So they have elite athletes. They're super long, and they get into you, and the Jazz wilted. Oh my goodness. First quarter, they scored 12 points. They went 4 of 20 from the field. It was like, oh my gosh, is that what playing and learning about 7 youngsters is going to be about? And the answer is kind of yes, because our guys aren't there yet. And so there are going to be moments in time when they're not very good and when they're getting beat and they have to learn how to adjust. And that's actually what they did. So in a preseason game, we got some really, really ugly play, but we also got a little bit of a sample of kind of what the season's about. I mean, they got annihilated in the first quarter. They went 4 of 20. They had maybe 1 shot in the restricted area. Taylor Hendricks had a tip-in that didn't go in early. Colin Sexton floated one over kind of the left-hand side of from about, I would call the floater zone. And that was kind of it. Like the shot chart for that game in the first quarter for the Utah Jazz was just literally nothing in the paint nearly at all. They had in the first quarter, by the end of the night, I think they were 1 of 3 at the rim is what the official numbers were. And like 2 of them were tip-ins. They got nowhere. The Rockets play a physical style where they switch defensively. They kind of switch to touch where they come up to you. They were long, and the Jazz couldn't get anything going, and they just sat on the outside, and it wasn't that they weren't making shots. The shots weren't good. The good news on this is that in the third quarter, the Jazz came out, and you suddenly saw a completely different team. You saw the Lauri, Markkanen pin down curls getting into the paint. You saw the Jazz go to the free throw line 16 times for being the aggressor against the aggressive defense. You have to meet force with force. You saw them go 11 of 23 and score 39 points in the third quarter. Fred VanVleet did not play the quarter, and so the Rockets had some areas in which they were not quite as strong and offensively, and that opened some things up for the Jazz defensively. But if you look at the Jazz shot chart in the third quarter, it's absolutely entirely at the rim. It's stunning to look at the difference. So that's, if that's what you want to, that's kind of the stuff that I'm going to look at and say, okay, that's pretty great. From the Jazz, when you can kind of do that contrast of things from the Jazz, is the fact that you can be that far off in one quarter and make that adjustment. And that's what we're looking for this year. And it's hard in the preseason because you've only played against yourself. This is not how the Jazz play defense. Instead, with the Jazz are playing different styles, and so you're only practicing against yourselves. There's zero chance for you to get that. Take a look. If those of you that are watching on video, I'll share the screen with you. For those of you on audio, it'll make sense nonetheless. But if you look here's the Jazz shot chart in the first quarter. There's 3 little X's in the restricted area that are misses. There's 1 make on the left-hand side, which was an alley-oop to Walker Kessler with 1:24 left in the first quarter. It was their only basket at the rim in the entire quarter. And the official number was 1 for 3. This looks like they went 1 for 5. And there's a bunch of mid-range long twos on the right-hand side where they go for 5. And then if you scan the third quarter, it's all in the paint. Everything's at the rim. There's 2 misses that are little floaters in the floater zone. There's not a single long 2 that's taken in the quarter, and you literally have the Jazz pounding everything into the basket and getting on the basket. It's a beautiful adjustment from the Jazz in the fact that they understand how they were what they needed to do to adjust to that game. So that's a great sign. And you saw the curl game. You saw a beautiful high pick and roll with Walker Kessler on a roll, in which he makes just a perfect read to Taylor Hendricks for a 3 early on in the quarter. This is, when you're wanting to watch plays together and you see what the Jazz want to do this year, like these are the kind of things that they're working on every single day in practice. Again, those of you on video, I'll share it with you. Those of you on audio, I think you'll get it just fine. But it's a high pick and roll with Keontae and Kessler's 2 guys on the left side of the floor. The spacing's not perfect because Lauri's not all the way out, and Taylor's in the right side. And in the first quarter of this game, every single time the Jazz drove to the basket, there was no room. Keontae and Colin Sexton were driving. Hendricks and Kessler weren't being guarded. It was there was no spacing, no room. So here's an adjustment. They cleared some space. They high on this one, and Keontae backs it out nicely, creates the space. He works to the left side of the floor to where there's 2 guys. He's got Alfred Şengün in a drop. Kessler, nice wide roll to the basket. And Keontae gives Walker Kessler the ball in a tough spot. He gives him the ball at 15 feet. This is not a place where Walker can really do a lot with it. Weak side defender slides in. Walker recognizes it immediately, kicks to Taylor Hendricks, who's unguarded in the right corner, and Taylor Hendricks buries the 3. Those are the kind of plays that's growth. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for. Walker makes a really nice decision. Keontae spreads the defense out, stretches them out with the way they play. We didn't try to fight their switch off a handoff. Instead, we played a high pick and roll. So you see those little adjustments the Jazz made in that ball game, and that made it, the third quarter a much better performance. Obviously, it's preseason. You don't want to overplay it, but they really got it handed to them, going 4 of 20 in the first quarter. And then in seeing what's probably going to be a top 5 defense. And then in the third quarter, they were able to make some adjustments, understand what's going on. And as Will Hardy said post-game, it's the first time with this group we've actually asked them to adjust, right? They haven't had that opportunity. You're not going to worry about the New Zealand Breakers in that sense. And you're working in practice every day just to do it in one individual way. So pretty cool to see that. 2 sides of it, right? Like here our guys went and saw a top 5 defense and looked completely out of sorts to start the night. And then on the flip side, they did make some adjustments. Did the Rockets let up a little bit? Van Vliet didn't start that half. Reed Shepherd's on the floor, is not as good a defensive player. Sure. And so are there going to be nights where that type of NBA defense digs into us? We're just overpowered. And the answer to that is absolutely 100%. The starting lineup has some real clunk to it. And that's what the preseason's all about. And let's dig into that next. And Will Hardy will probably have to take a look at this as well here as we continue on Locked on Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by my friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. I got a nice email from one of our listeners yesterday whose wife wants a Palisade, and I don't blame her because I told him I'm driving the Palisade right now, and it is just absolutely fabulous. It's got the third row of seats. In the back, when you don't have the third row seats out, it's 2 bucket seats in the back, so there's great room, and it's super comfortable ride. It drives beautifully. It's everything that I think so great about a Hyundai. It's high-end. It feels great. Everyone in it is comfortable, and the price and the bells and whistles are absolutely fabulous. I love the turning signal that shows up the blind spot on my dash right in front of me when I'm driving. Makes me feel much safer. That's the Hyundai experience. I've got the Ioniq 5 if you're looking for an electric. We're looking for another electric car right now, and frankly, what car bumps out all the time? The Ioniq 5. Every time you do the search, it's one of the best ones in the market. It's all at Murdoch Hyundai. Email me first at dlock09@gmail.com so we can give you your VIP experience at Murdoch Hyundai. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel's got exciting new deals for you this year as the NFL season is underway and the NBA season's right around the corner. So they've got a big return for you on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So you'll get started with a $200 bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's right. Place your first $5 bet and you get a $200 bonus bet guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com. Latest FanDuel sportsbook odds right now after the WNBA, big one tonight, by the way. Connecticut Sun and the Minnesota Lynx. Lynx are a 4.5-point favorite in that deciding Game 5. That should be a fun one tonight. In the NFL, Thursday night game this week, I believe is the Seahawks. No, Thursday night, I think, is the Thursday night is the Seahawks and the Niners are a 3.5-point favorite in that one. Texas and Oklahoma matchup this weekend. Oklahoma is a 14.5-point dog in the big one. Number 2, Ohio State versus number 3, Oregon. Ohio State is a 3.5-point favorite. Utes are at Arizona State. They're a 6.5-point favorite in that one. To check out all the odds at FanDuel.com. BYU a 5.5-point favorite against the Arizona. I think that one's at home, where Utah's in the desert, if I have it correct. That's all at FanDuel.com. The Jazz starting lineup might be a bit clunky. Taylor Hendricks does not have the ability to he made one nice drive on the right side to really impact the game offensively. The game has to kind of come to him. And nor does Walker. And so I think it's a little bit of a question right now of what happens when both Walker and Taylor are on the floor. It's why that play I showed you a moment ago on video that we talked about on audio is so important, is Keontae spreading it out correctly, Walker being able to make that play, and Taylor being able to knock down that corner 3. And Taylor did a nice job of, I think he hit, I'd have to look it up exactly, and might as well, since I do have it somewhat easily found here. At least I think I do. Taylor corner 3 shooting last year was pretty darn good. It was 43%, 33 of 76. So, if Taylor wants to sit in that corner and they want to come off the corner, Walker can find him every time. That's going to be fine. And maybe that's really what that offense is. It was a nice adjustment they made in the third quarter. But just so you have it, in the first quarter, the starters go 1 of 9 with 3 turnovers. Now, the team went 4 of 20, so it wasn't like anybody else did much better. In the second quarter, they go 4 of 9 with 2 turnovers, both of them by Key, one of them a dead ball travel. On the 2 field goals, 2 of the 4 are offensive rebounds. So with the starters on the floor against a good defensive team that they hadn't prepared for, like in the preseason, you don't prepare. So again, let's not overstate this stuff. But they go 5 of 18 from the field with 5 turnovers. Of the 5 field goals they got, 2 of them are offensive rebound putbacks. Again, let's not go too crazy, but this is the data we have. And I'm pretty certain that Will Hardy's looking at that. Right? Now, in the opening, again, against the switching defense, the Jazz really they got completely flummoxed. They got stagnant. They didn't move the ball. They stayed almost entirely on the perimeter. They didn't create for each other, and they were just totally out of sorts. Their field goal was a Colin Sexton kind of 9-foot jump shot on the left side on those pretty much a busted play, or Colin kind of came through into the pocket and floated off the glass. I wouldn't say it was a busted play. It was a Markkanen pick and roll that it materialized, but it wasn't, it was fine. Like, it was just a play on the left-hand side floor. The offense, the 5 field goals they got on the other side, one was that Hendricks 3 we saw, and then you began to see some other things opening up for the Jazz. And some of it having to do with playing open floor because the defense was better without Van Vliet. An early drag pick and roll. Keontae got all the way to the rim on with some early offense, which just means the defense created it. And that's some other good news we'll get to. The defense was actually pretty good last night. The Jazz got to the free throw line 16 times in that quarter. So, some of this is you don't have a field goal, but you have Lauri going hard to the basket and attacking. And they got some stuff going on their, as I mentioned, on their curl game where Lauri came off some pin downs and things. And then there was one beautiful play where Lauri had beat Jabari Smith on a bunch of curls, and Smith jumped to the top side, and Lauri read it beautifully, went backdoor. Keontae found him for a dunk, and it showed some real development and growth between Lauri Markkanen and Keontae George. There's a lot of talk about that Keontae went back to Finland. Those two have had a little bit of a connection, and that was a really, really good read by the two of them. So it's worth just keeping an eye on a little bit there. I do want to point out, one thing that Will Hardy's talking about is what is going to make us better defensively. And last year, the Jazz were really poor defensively. Certainly, they were 30th in the NBA overall in defense. And some of that, and we're not going to be very good defensively this year. When you're playing 7 young guys, you're not great defensively. Will talked about 3 things, though, are the keys to what they want defensively. He wants better point of attack defense. That, hey, the fact of the matter in this league is the minute you're in rotation, you're dead, is what he said last night. The minute you're in rotation, you're in trouble. You can talk about schemes and everything else, but at some point, you've got to defend at the point of attack. Number 2 is they've got to do a better job protecting the rim. And number 3 is defensive rebounding. So last night in the first quarter, while the offense is struggling miserably, the Jazz defensive rating was an 88. Just again, to remind everyone and put numbers in context that seem to make sense to people. And what are various numbers? The offensive rating last year, some extent, was about a 110, 150. It's a little complicated last year because of the fact that we had all these various different, excuse me, by the way, if you're wondering why my voice it is so smoky here. It's from the yellow Lake Fire. So last year, regular season, and this is going to be interesting to watch because of the rule change. The league average for the offense was a 115. Now, post All-Star break, the league average was a little bit lower. It was about a 113.7. But let's go with 115. So 88 in the first quarter was really terrific. Now, the Jazz offensive rating was a 50. But I actually would say that makes the offensive rating even more terrific at the fact that the Jazz were able to. In the second quarter, they did not defend particularly well. And then the third quarter, they defended really, really well again at 85 and an 85. So really, we're going to talk offense because that's what we always do. But I would say that that's probably the high point for the Jazz is how good they were defensively last night, consistently. To the point of what I made a moment ago, if you want the data to back up what I said a moment ago, the Jazz offensive rating in Kessler's 19 minutes last night was an 86, and in Taylor Hendricks' minutes was a 96. So that's why I'm saying that offense was a little clunky. Now, the defense was better with those guys on the floor. And the defense was good, actually, with some of our younger players on the floor. But then again, you're now playing their backup guys for Collier and Sensabaugh. So that was good. But the point is on this is that that Will's really said it. Better point of attack defense. Better protecting the rim. Everything kind of predicating with Walker at the core center piece of this defense. And then better defensive rebounding. The defensive rebounding to me is interesting because Lauri is not a particularly good defensive rebounder. Taylor's not a particularly good defensive rebounder. I don't think Keontae's a particularly good guard rebounder, and Colin's not. And Walker's okay. It's going to have to be a real collective effort. It's why Brice Sensabaugh's, I think, 7 or 8 rebounds last night jumps off the screen as an important number for the Utah Jazz and how he's playing. And, it's interesting. We'll get to Brice here in a second, but talking to some of the Jazz coaches about this, what they're trying to do is build this. last year they tried multiple schemes. They tried diff zone, and we at one point just forced everything left so everyone knew what they were doing. The effort this year is really to begin to build the defensive foundation that 2 or 3 years from now allows them to be a very, very good defensive team. Here's what we do. Yeah, we might have to adjust because of Luka. We might have to adjust because of Giannis. But here's what we do defensively that gets us our basis. And they're really trying to implement that right now. And I thought night 1 against a real NBA team of the preseason, at least, had some really positive, encouraging signs to that. Brice Sensabaugh is balling. Kyle Filipowski caught our eye as well. We'll talk about those two before we wrap up today here on Locked on Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the official ticketing app of the Locked On Podcast Network. Why? Because Game Time has all the features you know and want. Let's start with the most important ones. The all-in pricing. Toggle this feature to show the total upfront, no surprise fee checkout fee, so you know what you're going to get. Seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat at the app before you buy it. If you're heading to the hockey game tonight, that's probably an important one. Lowest price guarantee. They'll give you 110% difference in Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry. Then Game Time takes it to the next level. They've got a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Filters out all the fluff to show you the only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of other tickets available. They had for Labor Day, they did an incredible deal with the Diamondbacks and Dodgers, where people were getting up to 50% off for a big baseball game. It's great stuff. So pick any live upcoming event, hockey maybe, and browse through the seats on Game Time and talk about the great deals you can find. It's all at Game Time. Download the app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA and get $20 off your first purchase. That's right, $20 off your first purchase with the promo code LOCKEDONNBA. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. Who's going tonight? My wife and I are going. I think we're sitting in the last row of the entire building, willingly, excited to have a night out and be there for the festivities. Going to get there early, take it all in. What Ryan and Ashley Smith have done is just amazing. And to have an NHL hockey team in our town, another professional team, just incredible. So good for our state, so good for our city, so good for our business. Just so excited to be a part of it tonight with the Utah Hockey Club making its debut against the legendary Chicago Blackhawks. Part of me can't believe the Chicago Blackhawks are in town. I'm not a huge hockey guy, but the Chicago Blackhawks are a big deal, man. Brice Sensabaugh's balling. He was really good last night in a lot of different ways. And maybe the biggest one is he made it happen for himself. And what I mean by that is he was going to get the basketball. He got 7 rebounds. He had 11 points. He played some point guard. He hit 2 of 3 from 3. He's a really skilled player. And after the game, Will Hardy was talking about Kyle Filipowski, but I actually thought he could have been talking about Brice Sensabaugh. He was talking about how none of these guys have ever played a basketball game until they get to the NBA where they're probably not the best player on the court. And maybe they played 1 or 2, but they're probably always the best player on their team. So they've come into every game starting. They've come into every game knowing they're going to touch the ball in almost every possession. They've come into every game knowing they're going to get all their own opportunities. And then all of a sudden they get to the NBA, and somebody like Brice Sensabaugh was a late first-round draft pick, and Kyle Filipowski was an early second-round draft pick. They're not seeing the ball. They're running up and down the floor 2 or 3 times without touching the ball. There's not plays called for them. They're just playing out. It is such an incredible fundamental change. Now, someone like Isaiah Collier, by playing point guard, still has the ball in his hands, but he has to learn how to come off the bench too. None of these guys have ever come off the bench in their life. And what I thought I saw last night out of Brice Sensabaugh was someone who's kind of figured this thing out in the sense of like, oh, if I'm going to play, this is what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to come off the bench with a burst of energy. I can't wait for the game to come to me. I'm going to have to create opportunities to touch the ball by getting a rebound and pushing and doing things of that nature rather than waiting for the team to go get me the ball, because that's what they do, because this team isn't going to do that because I'm not the best player on the floor anymore. I'm going to have to scrap and hustle and force my way onto the floor, and he made probably 4 or 5 hustle plays last night. Brice Sensabaugh never had to make a hustle play in his life at Ohio State. He never had to make a hustle play in his life playing out of Florida. I think he was might have been the player of the year, if I remember correctly. And if he wasn't the player of the year, he was awfully close because he was an incredible. I think he averaged 24 points and 9 rebounds or something like that in his high school career. I mean, this guy was just 23 points and 9 rebounds as a senior in high school. And then he goes to Ohio State and he scores 16 points a game and 5 rebounds on 48% shooting. Like he's the guy. And then all of a sudden he comes to the NBA last year and he shoots 39% and 30% from 3, and he can't figure out why can't. Well, that's why. That's 100% why, if you're wondering. You can't figure this out. And so last night, I thought you saw a second-year player who's worked really, really hard on his body, changed who he is a little bit as a player, and is figuring out how to play as an NBA player. It was cool. Kyle was really interesting also last night. Kyle Filipowski played 10 minutes against a lot of it against, let's make sure we understand, let's put it in context. Those minutes were against Nate Williams, Dante, Samuels, McVeigh, Hinton, and Howell. Okay? Or Hinton and Noel. None of those guys are NBA players. Okay? However, Kyle goes 3 of 4 from 3. Those are still buckets. What jumped out to me was the shot looked really different. It had a very beautiful high arc to it. And the thing that's interesting about Kyle is if you listen to people talk about Kyle and the truth on Kyle of his career so far, I don't think they're the same. He's a career 31% three-point shooter at Duke who shot 67% from the free throw line last year. Shot 35% from 3 last year, which is better. So it's a little bit of a wide range. But so he's not a great shooter. He's a very good passer. He's a good ball handler. He grew late. He has a lot of ball skills. He sees the floor very well, but he's not a great shooter. There's not like a track record that says Kyle Filipowski is going to be a great shooter. He might, if he turns into one, the Jazz really got something at 32nd pick of the 2024 draft. But there's not something that says that like he's not coming in as an 80% free throw shooter with 40% from 3, and you're like, oh, that's going to happen. No, that's a big, huge question mark. That's why he went 32nd in the draft. Is because people decided he wasn't big enough to defend and he wasn't a good enough shooter. So if he can shoot like he did last night, and I thought the shot looked different. In the summer league, his shot looked, to me, was pretty flat and looked like getting the distance was going to be an issue. Now, these were corner threes mostly, but they had beautiful arch to him and looked like he might have been working with a Noah shooting gun for a while and looked different. And he played really, really well last night. Again, it's not his fault he played against who he played against, but that's who he played against. We're playing 7 preseason games. I'm guessing Lauri gets a game off here at some point, and then Kyle bumps into the rotation, and we'll see him play against NBA players and see how he looks. The guy averaged 16 points and 8 rebounds last year at Duke. He's really, really good. Will Hardy had an interesting comment about it. He's really smart. His brain excites me. He's really smart, he said. He sees and understands quickly. So that's exciting. And the same thing they said about Key. And last year they really pounded us on about Keontae, about how much he loved the game and his brain and all that stuff. And it seems to be coming to fruition. He looks way better in control and what he's doing and how he's playing. And he was really, Will Hardy said pregame with Keontae that he was really pushing him on his voice and leading the team. And you could see Keontae directing a lot of traffic. He was pretty regularly directing Taylor places, which is interesting. That I'd like to learn more about that if I can, of why that is, what's taking place. Is Key seeing something that Taylor's not seeing yet? Is Taylor looking to Key for that leadership? Is Taylor not doing it right? And so Key's got corrected. It could be that simple. There's something, or those two kind of found a bond. I don't know what it is. It could be anything. So I'm certainly not going to project it to be anything, but I think it's worth talking about. More importantly, it's about, I think, seeing the Louisville, Texas native Keontae George doing a nice job of rolling into that leadership role that Will Hardy talked about. All right, here's the plan. Tomorrow's show we'll have Thurl Bailey. Thursday's show we'll have Thurl Bailey, and I'll do a segment and then Thurl Bailey. I'll do a segment then Thurl Bailey. Friday we'll react to the Jazz and the Nuggets and get ready for the Saturday game against the Spurs. Next Monday we'll react to that Spurs game And then we play Sacramento on Tuesday. And I think we'll do me and then Michael Smith. Then we'll react to the game on Wednesday. Then we'll do me and Michael Smith on Thursday. And then we'll start into our previews because then we'll do my 240 and my points gained coming up. So that's kind of going to, and that'll take us to opening day on the 23rd. Exciting. All right. Hope to see you at the hockey game tonight. I'll be the guy in the Jazz hat rooting on the Utah Hockey Club. And come hang out with us. Say hi. Thank you so much. This has been Locked on Jazz. Appreciate your time. For those of you on audio, we'll send you or go grab Locked on NBA's daily podcast. We're playing with some new formats of shows there. And on video, we'll send you the first ever 24/7 national sports channel, Locked on Sports Today.